Okay, yesterday we were learning the dinim of what's called things which are forbidden because of sakana. Okay, one last din over here before we go on to the next dinim, which is the dinim of tzedakah. But it says you're not allowed to. Words are very, very powerful, and therefore the din is you're not. Words are very, very powerful, and therefore the din is you're not supposed to speak punishment about a person. Like he says, people used to say, "Oh, a cat or a dog should take you away," or a bear should take you away, because there's a strong power of speech. Like it says, "Brus kruselis vasayim." It's a very powerful tool, speech. And therefore, people should be careful not to say punishment about another Jew, about another person. They have to be very careful the way they speak, and not to speak things that might be things of punishment and so on. Okay, next dinim are very, very, very important. The dinim of tzedakah. Very important din. Believe it or not, it's a positive biblical mitzvah to give tzedakah. Not to yourself. To poor people, or to institutions like CNBH or CBH. Because the pasuk says, you have to open up your hands and give. And whoever sees a poor man and doesn't give him tzedakah is transgressing a negative commandment. It says, you shouldn't close up your heart when the person asks you for money. Tzedakah is a sign, like he says, of Zer Avram, the children of Eden. Lastly, tzedakah is said by Avram, and it says the kiseh of the Eden and dasu emes, the true Yiddishkeit, only stands in the merit of tzedakah. Gadol ha'iseh tzedakah, the Gemara says, a person who gives tzedakah is greater than all the sacrifices together. And they quote all the psukim for these things. The Yidden are not redeemed only with tzedakah. A person never becomes poor from giving tzedakah. No matter how much tzedakah you give, you're never going to become poor.
Who's saying this?
Torah. Not me.
No, I just wanted Torah.
Yeah.
Still
this is all from the Gemara, by the way.
This is the rabbi.
No. This is all from the Gemara. The Gemara says all these things. I mean, Kitzur just quotes from the various different Gemaras in Poskim. Nothing bad happens to a person because of tzedakah. Whoever gives mercy on others, Hashem has mercy on you. Whoever is an achzari, a mean person, so it says in halacha, you should question if he's Jewish or not. Person that's not generous in giving tzedakah, you should question if he's Jewish, because Hashem always answers the poor people. Therefore, there's a covenant that the pasuk says, "V'hoya ki yitzak elai," when the poor man will cry out to me, Hashem says, I'm going to hear him. I'm going to listen to him. Huh? Yep. And it also says life is what's called galgal hachayzer. Galgal hachayzer means a wheel that turns around. Today you might be on top of the wheel, tomorrow you might be at the bottom of the wheel. Today you might be at the bottom of the wheel, you might end up to be on the top of the wheel. The more a person gives tzedakah, the more they get. In fact, the pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh, we read this aliyah on Yom Tiv, aser to aser, says you should tithe. So the Gemara says, what's the double expression? Aser to aser, tithe, you should tithe. So the Gemara says, aser b'shvil shetisasher. You should give 10% in order to sasher that you should get rich. Because aser doesn't only mean giving a tenth, but it also means Ashir. Ashir is a rich man. So the pasuk says, aser to aser, by giving tzedakah, the more tzedakah you give, the more tzedakah you're going to get. And the Gemara says, the pasuk says, "B'chanuni no b'zayis," and the Gemara learns that a person is allowed to test Hashem with one mitzvah only. In other words, you can't make condition with Hashem. Okay, I'll put on tefillin, you'll do this for me. With tzedakah, the Gemara says, the pasuk based on the pasuk, "B'chanuni no b'zayis," Hashem's test me with this mitzvah, and therefore the Gemara says, if somebody gives tzedakah, he has a sick child, and he says, I'm giving tzedakah on the condition my child should be healthy, he's a complete tzaddik. He's doing it for an ulterior motive because he wants his son to be healthy. It doesn't matter. By tzedakah, you can test Hashem with tzedakah. And he said, okay, that's the basic mitzvah of the tzedakah. Now, the Rishonim ask, we mentioned this many times, there's a famous tshuva in Rashba. The Rashba asks, why don't we make a bracha on tzedakah? Such an important mitzvah. The Gemara says, that Rebbe brings us down in Tanya, by the way, that tzedakah is equal to all mitzvahs. In fact, Al Rebbe says in Tanya, that when it says in Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Yerushalmi Talmud, the word mitzvah, it means tzedakah. Stam mitzvah in Yerushalmi, it means tzedakah. So the Rashba asks, why don't we make a bracha on tzedakah? You're going to do a mitzvah. It's a very important mitzvah. So the Rashba answers, because any mitzvah which is dependent on somebody else, you can't make a bracha on. For instance, a guy is about to give tzedakah to a poor man, so he's going to make a bracha. What happens if the poor man doesn't agree to take it? Because in order to give tzedakah, it takes two. You have to be the giver and the receiver. So therefore, Rashba says you can't make a bracha on tzedakah because you might be giving, you can make a bracha before you do the mitzvah, right? You have to make a bracha before the mitzvah. You're going to make a bracha, and the poor man might not take. I haven't seen that yet, by the way. I've seen the opposite way. You know, they say a guy was fundraising. They asked him, were you successful? He said 50%. What do you mean 50%? The poor were willing to take, the rich were not willing to give. So he was 50% successful. So therefore it says, there's a Chassidish answer. We said many times, why doesn't, a Chassidish answer, so to speak, why you don't make a bracha on tzedakah? Because you can imagine a guy, a chassid, wants to do a mitzvah, such an important mitzvah, tzedakah, it's equal to a mitzvah, it brings Mashiach. He's going to want to go to the mikveh first, before he makes the bracha. Then he's going to want to put on his hat, jacket, and his gartel. And then he's going to have to go wash his hands. He said, by then, the poor man will die. He said, when it comes to tzedakah, this is what Chassidish answer is. When it comes to tzedakah, there's no time for brachas. There's no time for brachas. You give the tzedakah, there's no time even to make a bracha, just give the tzedakah. There's a very, very famous story in the Gemara, Nachum Ish Gamzu, who was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. One of the teachers of Rabbi Akiva was Nachum Ish Gamzu. He also always said, Gamzu l'teva. You know, everything, this is also good. The Gemara says he was once coming back from a journey. His camels and donkeys, whatever, were loaded up. And the poor man came to him and said, I haven't eaten for a few days, please give me some food. So Nachum said, sure, let me just unload the stuff and then I'll be able to give you. By then, the poor man died. Poor man Pasha died from hunger. So when Nachum realized what just happened, he cursed himself. And he said, the eyes that saw the poor man and didn't give him to the right should go blind. The hands that saw that didn't give right away and he cursed his hands and his head and his feet. He became cursed at the end of his life because he didn't right away give tzedakah when the poor man needed it. Because he cursed himself, it had the curse as effect, and he became crippled from all those things that he did. So when it comes to tzedakah, you just have to give. You know, okay, I could say, let me just write a check. That's okay. But you can't say, let me write the check tomorrow. Okay, you gotta do it today, you can't do it tomorrow. You know why? Because tomorrow you have to give again. What?
We'll say once, let me know what's happening to the market. Let me find out how
That's too late.
Yeah, it's too late.
What happens in the market, as far as the stocks you invested in, it depends on how much tzedakah you give. So it doesn't matter how the market is doing. Fakir, at the opposite. You give tzedakah and then the market will do well. At least your stocks will do well. Everybody else's stocks, I don't know, but your stocks will do well. The spiritual stocks for sure do well. Okay, next. Every person is obligated to give tzedakah based on what they're able to give. Now, the minimal requirement in halacha really is 10% of the income. The Gemara says preferably 20% of the income should be given to tzedakah. Even a poor man who himself gets tzedakah, halacha says, he has to give tzedakah to somebody who's let's say you have 2 cents. You're poor, you have 2 cents. And this guy doesn't even have 1 cent. You have an obligation, halachically, to give him the cent. You're also poor, you're accepting money. Doesn't matter. The person is poorer than you, so halachically you have to give him the money. I thought you wanted to say something. Okay. Okay, what happens? Okay, he has to give tzedakah. Even if he gives, like it says, a poor man who gives a larger percent. You know, you can have a poor man that gives $1, but that's 10% of what he has. You can have a rich man that has $1,000 and he'll give you $50. So the $50 is much less percent than the 10% of the poor man. So in Hashem's eyes, the poor man's dollar is greater than the rich man's $50, because this is a greater percentage. And like it said by Korbanos, by the cheap korban it says Reich Nechayach Hashem, it be a good smell to Hashem. By the poor man's korban it says a good smell for Hashem. So the Gemara says Echad Amarba v'Echad Amamit, whether you give a lot, whether you give a little, as long as you give what you couldn't give. And therefore, but the din is, and the Gemara quotes this also, the halacha quotes it by tzedakah. A poor man who gives a rich man's tzedakah is good. A rich man who gives a poor man's level of tzedakah is no good. He doesn't, like a rich man had to bring an expensive korban by certain korbanos. And if he gives a poor man's korban, he didn't fulfill his obligation. You brought a korban, the poor man giving the same korban. For him it's good, for you it's not good. And therefore the rich man has to give proper tzedakah. Okay. Now what happens, also then Shulchan Aruch, even though the Rebbe many times told people differently, but I can only tell you what it says in halacha, that what happens if a person, if he gives tzedakah, he's not going to have what to live from. He probably won't have what to live. So it says then he's not obligated to give 10%, but he should give whatever they're able to give. But he still has an chiyuv of giving tzedakah. Now, the question is, how much tzedakah can you get from take from women? How much tzedakah are you allowed to take from women? So Shulchan Aruch it says, okay, you can only take from women a little bit of tzedakah. Why? Because then we assume that the husband didn't give her permission to give that so much money. Yeah, so therefore she can't give so much money. But the pasuk can bring down what happens if a woman's a businesswoman, and she works in the husband's business, she can give as much as she wants. I mentioned many times the famous story. There was a certain woman that gave a lot of tzedakah, and her husband was against it. So he took her to Din Torah, took his wife to Din Torah. Who was the Rav? Her father was the Rav of the city. So you know, fathers-in-laws are always on the sons-in-law's side. They always take the in-law side. So they went to her father, Din Torah. Mamsha Din Torah. So the husband, he was the plaintiff, so he goes first. He said, my wife gives so much tzedakah, and it's against my will for her to give so much tzedakah. So he turns to his daughter, and he says, you're the defendant, what do you say? So she asked her father, the Rav, is it not true that there's a din that a husband has to heal his wife if she's sick? Is there such a din in the Ksuba? Yes, there is. She says, if that's the case, when a poor man comes to my door, I get sick. Seeing him poor, I get sick. And the only way I get healthy is when I give him money or food. So she says, tell me, he's not obligated to let me do that. He has to heal me. I get sick every time I see a poor man. So the husband says, she won the case. She's right. And
also the wife of the Rasha used to
Rasha's wife used to give a lot of tzedakah. All the Rebbitzes gave a lot of tzedakah, but nobody knew about it. Okay, there's a whole thing, even though, by the way, there's communal property, 50-50, whatever, but even then, it says you shouldn't take from women more than you assume the husband will let her. By the way, there's certain customs they used to have, like when a wife was pregnant, they used to give a lot of money to tzedakah, or to learn Mishnayos after she passes away. So that poskim write, in those cases, it was accepted custom that husbands would give tzedakah for the wives. So even if the husband doesn't want, Bezdin could force him to do it. to force him to pay the money, because that was an accepted tradition. Okay. Okay. Now, how much tzedakah do you have to give? So the first year, well, I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun. How much money do you give? So the Torah says that a poor man, you have to give dei machserei asher yachsalei. Whatever money he is missing, that's what you have to give him. So the Gemara says, what happens if this person who now is poor used to be wealthy, and he had servants, and he had a horse riding in front of him and all that? You have to give him what he's missing, even though l'chayr is more than a regular person has. But dei machserei asher yachsalei, whatever the person is missing, what he's accustomed, you don't have to make him rich, it says. But what he was missing as a person, when he was wealthy, you have to give him that amount of money. Okay, there's a lot, it's late, but there's a lot of dinim. What happens if you collect money for somebody, and then you have leftover money? Many times, somebody needs to be buried, there's no money. They collect money, and they end up collecting more money than they needed. So we'll talk about that in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow. Sorry,
would you mind this matter?
This for married for now?
For married.
We'll talk about collecting more money than you need.
Huh?